My wife could literally walk out of my life in any moment. She could choose to say this relationship is not for her. And when a relationship brings forward that reality that that choice exists, then that means that they are currently making a choice to not do that. Mm-hmm. And that actually unlocks what I would say most relationships, not just marriages, don't acknowledge.
And it makes the moment so much richer and real and connected.
It's truth.
Yes, which
It's
is
truth.
freedom. I'm with you 1,000%. We have two very special things today. One, it just so happens to be our 14-year anniversary, which started with me coming in from some blood work this morning and into the house and giving you a big long hug, and you're going, "Oh, babe, what's that for?" And I go, "Happy anniversary." She goes, "Oh my God, it's our anniversary."
I forgot.
What a great way to start. So that's the first
amazing.
thing, right?
I forget every year. It's fine.
Yeah, we have a podcast called The 10-Year Marriage, and you forgot our anniversary. Beautiful.
It's not called the 14th anniversary.
Exactly. It's called exactly.
You should know the date, though.
Exactly.
I know.
We had a lot going on. It was a big day yesterday, right? Yeah. And then just as exciting, we have our friend and almost like an inspiration for us,
Yeah.
Mr. Mark Groves here. A little bit about Mark. I'm going to make sure I get this right. It's the Mark Groves podcast. It's not Create the Love.
No, it's not. I've been thinking about that, though. I've been going through what am I really standing for now? What do I want to do in terms of brand direction and all that kind of stuff? So I've been thinking about it. Someone told me I should change the name, and I was like, well, when your podcast is your name, you can change subjects without changing it. Do you know what I'm saying?
100%.
But I have been thinking about that.
So that's a great question. So there's the book, Liberated Love, right?
Yeah.
And then you have Create the Love, which is it a way of being in a relationship or is it a course? And then you have the Mark Groves. So I'm assuming it's all integrated. How does it all kind of work together?
Yeah, so Create the Love was actually not born from some brilliant brand strategy. It was born from when I first wanted to start writing and teaching about relationships. I wanted to call it Create the Love You Want, but it was too long for Instagram. Mm-hmm. So I just chose Create the Love, which I think now of how synchronistic and serendipitous that was because it became so easy to say. And the premise was that I saw that, myself included previously, people thought that love was something that you just got lucky, that you either found someone who was good or you just didn't. And when I really dove into studying relationships, especially romantic relationships, I saw that it was a skill set, that it was anyone could learn this. And it wasn't about finding the love, that it was, I remember Stephen Covey had this person saying oh, I feel really disconnected from my partner. What do I do? And he was like, love her. And he's like, no, you're not hearing me. We're not good. It's not good. What do I do? And he's like, love her. Love is a verb. And I remember he talked about sitting outside his house, in his driveway, in his car, preparing for the most important moments of his day, which was walking in and being there for his children and his wife. And that really made me just think about how we don't realize that we're waiting for something that is always actually waiting for us. You know, that it's actually us who need to say, if we want this amazing relationship, who do we need to be to get it, to create it? Instead of, if I want this amazing relationship, who do I need to pick?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of I've noticed this probably too far down in our marriage, but every time I felt unloved by Angie, this is what I'm hearing you say, is exactly when I needed to go love her. Is that what you're...
Yeah, that instead of saying, what is my relationship missing, that it doesn't feel the way I desire, it's what does my relationship need so that it feels the way I desire, which is such a different way of orienting to it than we're taught.
100%. I love the synergy between that and the 10-year marriage, because that's really what the 10-year marriage is about, right? It's about how are you willing to show up for that other person so that you guys choose each other and don't have to be together, but you want to be together.
Right. Well, and ultimately, no one has to be together. You know, like in Kylie and I's, so our book, Liberated Love, was born from us. So I started Create the Love before I met my wife.
Oh, that was, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I started it about 2 years. I'd been writing for about 5, and I started on Instagram. I was there for about 2 years. And I had written a blog before that, and that was kind of when blogs were like doing well and the new thing. And now Substack, I guess, is a revival of that. But she had hers, which was Being as Beautiful, is her Instagram name. And I had the book Liberated Love was really about the journey that her and I went through, because we dated for about 4 years and then broke up, and we were apart for 9 months. And we were done. Like when we broke up, it was over. And when we came back, which she had reached out to me on, I think it was Instagram. I can't remember, but she had said, let's grab a coffee. I'd like to chat. And I knew at that point I was never going back to her. Like I was never going to pursue her, because I spent 4 years pursuing her. And by the time that relationship ended, I was done pursuing. I was like,
Yeah,
love
you
is
gave
going
it
to
your
meet
all.
me.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like I've been fighting to be chosen for most of my life. That wound has now been resolved. Let's go. And so when she reached out to me, I was like, yeah, I'm open to that. And then we chatted and we explored and dated again, and then came back together. And so Liberated Love was the book that we wrote together after we sort of did a postmortem on what was it that was so different about our second relationship, and why did the first one need to end? And, you know, much like you guys are talking about in the 10-year marriage, this idea that all of your old strategies, the ones that keep you apart, the ones that the dysfunctional way of communicating, at some point, our way of relating has to stop coming from wounds. It has to, we have ways of protecting ourselves from getting hurt, and those are important. But at some point, we have to actually explore why those exist so we can discover what skill set do we need to move beyond that. So when Kylie and I broke up, it was the end of me living in this wound of like, you don't fully choose me. And for her, when I would say like, hey, this is what I want to create. Do you want to create it? She's like, yeah, but I'm like hesitant. And so her exploration is like, what's wrong with me that I can't choose this? And so for her, when we broke up, the ending was like, what's right with her that she couldn't choose it? Like, you know, instead of having to be a problem that needed to be solved, like what happens if actually she was brilliant and wise?
So how much do you believe is the responsibility of the other person to work out their own stuff, but at the same time to understand their partner?
Yeah.
And to be able to work with it, right? Because, for instance, I tried pushing Angie away really hard when we first started dating. And I knew she was the one. I had to go on a walk with my dad, and he was like, what's wrong? I'm like, I have a feeling like if I screw this one up, I can't blame anyone but me, right? But I had all this trauma around, like this perceived trauma with my mother and all this stuff. I just kept pushing and testing her. And one night after a big blow up, she just called me out. She was like, I'm not leaving. I'm not going anywhere. Like, as a 23-year-old woman just figuring it out. And she left me speechless. So it's not her responsibility in my mind to be able to do it. But the fact that she was able to do it made her even more for me. And I don't know if that's a codependent thing. But for me, I'm like, I got to do the work myself as well. I'm responsible. But I don't know. There was just a connection there where she was able to organically or naturally understand it. Maybe because you went through your own shit, right? But you get what I'm saying? Like, how much was it Kylie's responsibility with her own journey versus yours?
Yeah, it's such a good question, because of course it's like, how much is my work to help heal your wound?
Yes.
You know, which what it sounds like Ange did in that moment is she saw inside you what you needed to hear. Like it sounds like the wound with your mother, that she was able to say like, I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And when Kylie and I came back together, I said to her, I don't trust you. Like, you told me you chose me for 4 years and you didn't fully. And now you're coming back and telling me you choose me? Like that, I don't trust your words. And she said to me, I get it. I get it. It makes total sense. And for me, as someone who likes second guess myself, and
Yeah.
it was so wonderful to have the reality of that was very valid. And then she said to me, I'm not going anywhere. I choose you.
So you needed to hear the
See?
same thing.
And I was
Yeah.
like, you know,
Yeah.
I did. I needed to hear it because all I had experienced before, a lot of what I had experienced before was I might go somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
It wasn't that all in and that commitment.
Yeah, and you know, I learned in that relationship 1.0 that Kylie was anywhere from like 92 to 99% certain, but she was never 100. And I was 100, but I should have never been 100. So like I lacked discernment, where she lacked self-trust in being able to trust what she's choosing and she could commit to things. Because like when you're afraid of commitment, you're not afraid of commitment. You're afraid of where commitment leads. And so the misconception is like there's something wrong with me that I'm just terrified of commitment. No, you're just terrified of being left, of being abandoned, of being rejected,
Yes.
Right.
of not being able to trust yourself, of losing
Not feeling
yourself.
enough, yeah.
Right. And so, but for me, I presented as all in. But you couldn't possibly trust me if I said that, because why would I be all in with someone who's not all in with me?
Yes.
So what got resolved in that first relationship ending was like, I shouldn't be all in. Like, oh, now I got me. I like the overcommitment is something that people pleasers do, is like, I'm bypassing actual, is this a good choice? A good rule is if someone's not fully into you, you should not be fully into them.
So do you feel like it, not like necessarily you have to play it like a game, but you have to be aware on how to show up. And that must be hard to do, because if with her and I, like I was the one who was scared of the commitment, abandonment, rejection, all the attachment styles, right? I had the cornucopia of them. And for me, I didn't realize I needed that escape hatch. She was all in, but yet she was so used to playing that game as well, right? And all the things, it was almost like the movie Hitch, like all the things I'd played in the past, like the little games, they didn't work with her. But, you know, it didn't happen.
Way to go, way to go.
Like,
I mean, that's how he knew I was the one.
But isn't that what you needed, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like someone finally to love you enough to not tolerate your shit.
Yeah, and
you
break
know,
the patterns,
and
right?
call you forward.
Yeah.
In such a loving way.
so the second time, did you pull back? Is that, or
Yeah.
you did?
But it was interesting because at one point I was like, we made a like, hey, we're gonna date for 3 months and then we'll revisit after 3 months. Like, what is meant to be the way we're supposed to relate to each other? Is it friends? Is it acquaintances? Is it strangers? Is it lovers? And about like, I don't even know, maybe it was like 2 months in, I remember just saying like, oh yeah, we're like in a relationship. Like, yeah, we're doing this. And she was like, no, we're not yet. Like, we made an agreement. And I remember having anxiety from that. Like, what do you mean you're not all in?
Yeah.
But it was actually like, oh, I'm so used to speeding things up to try to gain certainty. And she's so used to slowing it down to not so it doesn't go too fast, that both of us had to meet in this middle where we talk about it in the book. It's like right space, right pace. That like if you're used to needing distance, can you come a little closer? If you're used to being too close, can you give a little distance? So together you're finding out like what is healthy relating. And to come back to your original, like the question you asked about like whose responsibility is the wound, and then
Yeah.
it's our responsibility to know our partner's wounds and our partners to know their own. And then as a relationship, how do we relate to each other to be able to heal these things? But it is still the individual's responsibility to take ownership for how they show up, not just with their own stuff. So if I'm someone who's prone to getting really defensive, which I'm sure that was a recovery opportunity for me, one of the ways that you can start to heal that is when someone says something to you and you're normally getting defensive, you like breathe into it and you say, which this is really, it's like eating your own shoe, is you say, I can see some truth in what you're saying. And by doing that, I'm ending up in a conversation I've never been in, because I'm so used to like clapping back and putting it back on the other person, or trying to defend, which you can just feel my self-worth is just fragile in the moment, that I'm now saying there's value in your contribution. I don't like it, but there's value in it. So yeah, I hope that answers that.
Well, it's kind of disarming too.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
That's a huge tool. I mean, just that, I agree how it takes you in a whole different direction, right? Because I'm the defensive one in the relation. I saw the
So
look
you
he
guys,
gave me.
so you guys give a little.
I mean, you looked at
I mean,
me
I
like,
get defensive if he comments that there's too many onions in the dinner.
Well,
And I'm like,
you know, we all have our own little ways, and Angie has a tendency to put up the vault,
Yeah.
right? It's almost like I picture like, whoo, whoo, like protected, right?
Yeah.
And then if that vault's up, like I call it the shield, and then I come with this sword, not to hurt her, but I'm trying to like slash down this vault. And the more I try to hit it, the shield, the more it goes up. So I'll have to, instead of like breaking down the door, I'll have to pick the lock. And picking the lock is more like, hey babe, like I see you, I hear you, I feel you, like this, I understand where you're coming from. And then I'll use words like maybe, or is it possible? And I don't think, if I wasn't emotionally intelligent inside of this relationship, I would use those words.
right. And we've come a long way. I mean, right? When I was 22 and you were 31, like that's not how the conversation would.
Yeah, it wasn't with
Happen.
Kylie.
Yeah.
I remember being side by side in bed after a conflict, just like neither of us talking.
Yeah.
Like I could feel myself frozen in my body with so many words.
And
that
you wanted to
be
say it
spoken.
all. Yeah.
Yeah, but they just couldn't get from here to here.
Yep.
And you can feel it in your throat when it's just like built up, like a frog in the throat, you know, as they say. Which that's why so many people who have problems expressing themselves have issues with their thyroid.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Yeah.
interesting.
That is interesting.
So how much of this, though, you know, you started it before her, but now you're like creating something while you're going through it, to an extent?
Yeah, like in essence, I started, we saw everybody when we were in relationship 1.0, you know. I was connected to all the masters. So you're like learning from all these people, but yet you can't get through. If two people who love each other and are open to growth and responsibility can't make it, you know, you're kind of like, well, then what the fuck?
Yeah.
And because the way we ended our relationship was so beautiful. And it was the first time I'd ever ended a relationship with like deep reverence and grace. Like we had a closing ceremony for our relationship.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like one of the stories that was living in our first relationship is I came back from a run once and I was like, man, I feel like I'm chasing her. And then she just distances. Once I catch her, she's distances again. So I was like, I don't want to do that. So I came back from this run. I shared it with her. And she said, yeah, you know, I haven't told this to you, but I had this dream where I was in a burning house, and the burning house was our relationship, and I needed to leave. And so this has been like plaguing me. And so in our closing ceremony, because she was like always trying to figure out that she had this call of like, he's a great guy, it's a great relationship, but it's not for you right now. And so she didn't want that. She was like, what's wrong with me that I want to leave a good man? Like, I finally got the guy I manifested, blah, blah. In our closing ceremony, we actually bought a little birdhouse to represent the house, to honor it. And then we actually burned it.
Wow.
And we answered 3 prompts, which is interesting. I was sitting outside in the car waiting to go in to have the conversation with her, and I'd said, like, do you want to do like some sort of ceremony? We hadn't spoken really much since we broke up. It was about a month later. And we hadn't had like a proper sit down. And I don't know why I wanted to have a proper sit down. I was like, is this something crazy people do? Like when I was Googling like closing ceremony.
Just the fact that you were both open to this
Yeah.
is proof alone that you belong together. It's beautiful, but think about this. Not many people would even,
Yeah, people
one
would be like,
person
"What?"
wanting to do it, the other person be like, yeah,
Right.
that's a great idea, right?
Yeah, well, that's why I was like, is this what crazy people do, right? Because
Yeah.
you're like, I've never heard of this. Actually, I heard of conscious uncoupling from Catherine Woodward Thomas, I think her name is. And that was like what's her name, man? It was like huge in, I want to say the 2000s from Gwyneth Paltrow.
Okay.
She did it. I think it was Gwyneth Paltrow.
Conscious uncoupling. I
Chris,
like
whatever
that.
his name is. I forget whoever her ex
The
was.
guy,
The
Coldplay.
Coldplay,
Yeah.
right. So I looked it up and there was like different versions. So I like put one together, sent it to her. I'm sitting outside in the car waiting to go in the house for it. We had like a plan for it. And I remember thinking like, I don't want to go in. And I was like, do I not want to go in because I genuinely just don't want to do this right now? Or do I not want to go in because I'm afraid? And like, the guy who can do this doesn't exist yet. And it was number 2. So I was like, damn it. So I went in. And the guy who can do a closing ceremony only exists through doing a closing ceremony, right? Like the person who has the hard conversation only exists through having the hard conversation.
You make the commitment, become the commitment.
Exactly. And like, it's almost like a future you is walking you down the path you need to walk down to get the skill set to become the future you. And when I went in that house, I was forever changed. You know, it was the most beautiful thing I've ever done. And it was the hardest. Like, I get emotional thinking about it because, like, when we had to answer those prompts, one of them was, like, what's your favorite memory? Oh, fuck, great. We're, like, relationships ending, and here's our favorite
It's
memory.
like a funeral for you.
Dude, it was
Like,
so
I
hard.
mean, that's the way I'm imagining
Yeah,
this,
totally.
right? But beautiful in its
It
own way.
was. It was like the second prompt was, what are you most grateful for about the other person and why? And then the last one was, what did you hope for the other person? That was harder to access, obviously, which we shared. But it was through that process that I experienced for the first time in my life that love could exist when a relationship ended. Not just exist, but actually deepen. It was like cells in my body were changed because I had actually lived a deep sense of unconditional love, like true unconditional love, which I think really set the stage for the ability to come back. At the time, that wasn't what I was thinking. I was just like, I love this woman so deeply, and I honor her path. Her path is not me. If her path's not me, she's not my path either. And so, you know, I was engaged when I was 27, and that was actually the birth of Create the Love. Was like, I went through that. I didn't know why.
Okay.
I got to engage when I didn't want to. I remember having the ending conversation, and like, in hindsight, I desperately wanted her, my ex-fiance, who was a great human being, is a great human being. I wanted her to just say, I get it. Like, you're free to go. And I wanted everyone I knew, which, like, that makes me emotional because I, like, wanted everyone I knew to say, it's okay. Like, it's okay to leave. It's okay that this doesn't work. But that's not generally what I got. It doesn't mean some friends weren't like, we got you.
So it's this completion of closure, of honoring on the way out. But let me ask you a question. Do you think the fact that you don't have that closure with your ex-fiance and the fact that you were able to go the entire route with the woman that you're with, do you think that, because if you and Kylie are so committed, and it sounds heavy and deep and so much, and you're putting this 4-year relationship to bed and
Yeah.
having a ceremony, right? And you're both committed to it. And to have that kind of like desire to go there almost to me shows, it's easy to look in hindsight, but it almost shows like that's
Commitment
one
to
of
each
the
other.
reasons.
Yeah.
What's that, sorry?
The commitment to each other just initially. Like,
It's like the proof that
Yeah.
you almost
We're
belong
safe.
together.
Like,
Yes.
you're safe beyond what you ever thought safety could be, but then your relationship's ending, so it's a mind fuck. And that like full circle moment of my previous engagement was that I was able to say to Kylie, you're free to go. Like, I love you.
so you were able to give her what you desired.
Needed so badly. I was like finally on the other side of that conversation and able to see what I mean, we were young when that happened in my previous engagement, but it was like I was able to see through my own suffering on the other side of that. I was given the tool to be like, because I knew it wasn't about my fiance. It was about me. And it was like I was now able to be the one getting the rejection or experiencing it, the misalignment, and be like, oh, this isn't about me. Which was so powerful to be able to depersonalize it, because I hadn't been, I took everything personally when it came to rejection. And it was like also really interesting because, you know, people were very invested in our relationship perceptually, right? Because we're like publicly having a relationship. I teach relationships. My partner teaches relationships, teaches women.
Were you doing your separate things?
We taught a course together, actually.
Gotcha.
At the time we had, I think it was the second course I ever created. No, actually, maybe it was the second. But, you know, once we broke up, I was like, archive.
Okay, that one's not going to be
I dove
anymore.
deeper.
Yeah.
I'd created a breakup course. And so I relaunched that. And actually, it was really powerful because I walked through my breakup with people walking through their breakup. So that actually was really powerful for me because it was like, I know how to move through endings. So for me, it was like, let's just deepen the potency of this.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting, and I'm just thinking of this in the moment,
Yeah.
especially with, not to make it about us, but like,
Make it about you.
what if at the end of the 10 years, you actually do this ceremony? Could you do this now?
I was actually thinking that, by the way.
Yeah.
When I was just talking about it, I was like, oh, that'd be really cool if in your 10-year, you actually did a closing ceremony for the previous 10 years as a way of honoring what a sacred
Because
journey.
you've done this in
100%.
I know with my Warrior Men's group, we've had to like take something and like bury it and burn it, right?
Well, even deeper than that, like part of the concept, which I find interesting, is like after that 10 years, are you deciding to renew consciously, or are you deciding to part ways in that way, right? And so having that ceremony around it and really honoring the last 10 years and who you used to be and now who you've become, regardless if you're going to renew that contract or let that contract and that relationship go, it's a beautiful ceremony, either, you know, going into the new versions of yourselves,
Well, it's
or
almost like you
letting that be.
It's almost like the thing we have to do for ourselves, we have to do for our relationship,
Yeah.
right? Like,
It is a death, you know, like, isn't every day a death? Isn't every breath a
Yeah.
death? You know, it's like, I used to work in pharma, and when I was in pharma, I'm still undoing the karmic path of my 14 years there. But when I worked there, at the end, I worked in oncology, and I sat in a room doing a preceptorship with an oncologist and a renal cancer doctor. And I remember him telling the husband and wife, the husband specifically, that his cancer was terminal. And I'd never been in a conversation like that. I'd never witnessed, especially it felt so weird for me to be like this guy standing over there watching this very personal, intimate moment, which that's probably another conversation of why was I even allowed. But what I witnessed in that moment was like someone coming to the confrontation of their ending. And then, you know, in the world of cancer, one of the common things spoken about is survivorship. Like the moment you find out everything is the end, everything that's important becomes very clear to you. Much like Ronnie Ware is a palliative care nurse, and she has a book called The 5 Regrets of the Dying. And there were 5 regrets that she saw that most people that came through palliative care had. And the majority of them are emotional and relational, which is not shocking. And so I think a lot of like what the premise of the 10-year marriage is so powerful, because it's like first acknowledging that there was always the possibility of an ending is something that everybody pretends isn't true. But yet my wife could literally walk out of my life in any moment. She could die, God forbid. I could die, God forbid. But it's like she could choose to say this relationship is not for her. And that would be her right to choose. And when a relationship brings forward that reality that that choice exists, then that means that they are currently making a choice to not do that. And that actually unlocks what I would say most relationships, not just marriages, but most commitments don't acknowledge.
And it makes the moment so much richer and real and connected.
It's truth.
Yes, which is
It's truth.
freedom. I'm with you 1000%. You know, when you said like leaving behind who you are and becoming, like we've been starting to play with, it's almost like, I don't want to get holy on this, but it's almost like
Get holy.
It's a rebirth.
Hallelujah.
Yeah.
It is a rebirth though,
Yeah,
right? Like
100%.
it's more of a revealing of yourself, getting closer to when you started out, you know, like even looking back on videos and pictures, and we play this game, like not only what we looked like and who we were, but even who is at our wedding that's no longer in our life and who's not alive. Like it is this
Well, and
this
it's
new
giving
game.
permission too, right? Like even bringing in our daughters and having this morning, you know, they're having conflict with some of their friends and showing them an example of being like, it's okay to not hold space for that person in that way, honor what was, but moving on from that. Like, I think this is showing and teaching this next generation too, like so much about connection and what relationship really means. Because when our parents were married, like, you know, it was till death do us part. And if it was divorce and we're separating, it was fairly negative and it was a big
like
thing.
Who's taking what side?
Exactly.
We can't still talk.
Like
And-
the kids have to choose who they live with and, you
Right.
know,
As
all those
opposed
things.
to like co-parenting from a loving place.
Right.
And so much of Till Death Do Us Part, you know, I started saying this when I started to make the awareness, maybe like pretty early in my writing, just like, what death do we mean? Do we mean like our mortal death, or do we mean the death of the version of us that made the agreement? Because to me, it's like, if you're 22 and making a commitment to marriage and you grew up in, let's say, some sort of religion, and you're expected to get married by a certain age and have kids by a certain age, which is most culture even without religion, because religion is so embedded in culture. And so, and biology, I mean, like there's time that is important there too. So it's like, the version of you at 45 is very different than that version. And especially if you just got married to someone who's practically a good choice, who you were arranged with, who, you know, that at 45, you're going, who am I? How did I choose this life? I feel so disconnected from who I am. And then it's like, what is a sign of success to get to 80 with somebody you never loved? Like, that's what we celebrate. And it used to piss me off when I would see memes that would say like, oh, happy 50th anniversary. What's different, you know, about you? And they'd say, oh, well, when we committed, we're different than the generation today. We took commitment seriously. And I'm like, oh yeah, way to shame.
Yeah,
You hate each
exactly.
other.
White knuckle it through to get the years, and it's like making it, you know, getting your Rolex at the end of a 30-year career that you
Right.
never liked, right?
Right. Like,
And
what a
that's-
celebration.
It's, to me, it's a prison, right? And that's the beauty of as many times as possible to be like, I chose the 23-year-old version of you, I chose the 30-year-old version of you, and I am just as excited to choose the 38-year-old version of you. Like, I continually
Right.
making the choice from a position of want and not need, not scarcity of like, oh my God,
Right.
if she leaves me.
Exactly.
Right. You touched about, I don't think you can have this conversation about marriage or relationships without talking about connection.
Yeah.
Right. So I was looking at a lot of the things that you're doing, and, you know, I'm obsessed with relationships, obsessed with it. You know, the Harvard study about, you know, I'm sure you've heard, right? They did a 100-year study, and they said, what's the secret to happiness? It's relationships.
Yeah.
You know, you live longer when you're in relationships. I believe in doing business relationally. I have a little course I call Date Your Business, right? How you make
That's great.
deposits into people, and then you make more money. Like, to me, not only is relationships the key to unlock everything, it's also it's the whole purpose of how you should live. Like, I think it is the single greatest thing that we are going to need in the next century. That is going to be a lack. I think it's in a pandemic, the lack of connection. And so when people ask me, I say the number one greatest currency moving forward is going to be the ability to connect relationally with another human being. And I think we're losing that a ton. So I was reading a lot what you're doing, and I was like, wow, you are kind of plugging that into everything, and, you know, businesses and relationships. And what's your take on that?
Yeah, it's interesting in like the rise of AI and more technology. I mean, you don't have to look very far back to see that the insertion of social media, although obviously highly valuable in terms of like I'm on Instagram, I met my wife on Instagram, like, you know, there's a lot of benefits. And I started to do an exploration of like, why do I feel anxiety and resentment about Instagram? You don't have to look far to see the very detrimental impact on mental health of social media and smartphones. We're basically the last generation to know life before this, when you had to like dial up internet and do all the things, and then life before even that, where you had to pick up the phone and like you know. Social media as a mechanism for young people is really very dangerous. One, the way that kids learn behaviors is by copying the behaviors of other people. So it would take you months and years of multiple age group relating to learn what is good, what's okay, what's acceptable, what's not. But you could spend 3 hours scrolling on a phone and get lots of data of like, what are the behaviors that society is doing that I need to adopt to be part of society. Mm-hmm. So it's happening on like, Jonathan Haidt talks about it being like, you have a compliance programming machine, like just like going so fast in a way that we never have. And the other way we learn behavior is by copying people who are exceptional at stuff. But there's now like, and this is a concept from his book, The Anxious Generation, which is an essential read. But he says that there's now just people who are famous for being famous.
No,
So
totally.
you have these generations of people who are like copying a Kardashian, whose behavior is not necessarily actually going to be successful in any workplace. But if you want to get likes and followers, sure.
Well, you could become president from famous from being famous.
That's true. That actually, okay, so it works for some things. But like, you know,
No, but even then, that's how much it's infiltrated. Like I have it sitting on my shelf in there, and there's other two books. Like we are dying on this hill. We have a 13-year-old daughter. She does not have a phone.
it's great. I mean, there's now technologies, at least like the Life phone I love,
Yeah.
because it has no opportunity for a doom scroll. So you go on there, there's music, directions, podcasts, and calling and texting.
Yeah.
None of those are
Which
socially.
we're not doing that good because they're still on their iPad on they're still scrolling.
Yeah, they're still scrolling. And I agree with you. It's unfortunately, it's these downloads that they're constantly getting, right? And they're not even able to decipher if that's right or wrong. It's just being downloaded and downloaded and downloaded.
For girls, the way that they handle conflict is socially. For boys, it's not quite the same. And that's just widely understood in the space. So what's the perfect weapon for that? Social media. And so it makes sense that we have a lot of anxiety if you add to that. So when I was exploring my relationship to Instagram, I'm like, why do I have these feelings? And I started to write out like, oh, I feel powerless. Why do I feel powerless? Because if I say the wrong thing, it can all be taken away. Nothing's ever enough. They always want more content. The algorithm's a mystery. No one knows how it works. Even like I was talking to someone from Meta recently, and they said, you know, we don't really know, but like the algorithm likes. I was like, you don't know? Like this is all part of the racket because it appeals to our psychology to say like, oh, I'm trying to figure it out. I want to win. And then you get a bit of virality, which is a lot like love bombing. So you get like a little bit of virality, and then what happens is all of those things that I'm talking about actually perfectly mirror being in a relationship with a narcissist or an abuser.
Oh wow, that's an interesting take.
Right. So this is different than YouTube because YouTube at least pays you for your content. So they're depending on how many subscribers you have, but there's a value exchange. We're making money from what you create. The better the quality, the
More collaborative.
Right. With Instagram, it doesn't care. And so if your behavior doesn't change for the algorithm, you don't experience. So they're starting to curate what art is. And which there can be value to like 140 characters because now you have to create in a smaller thing. A 90-second video, you have to get the message across in a quicker way. But what it does is it amplifies more emotional content because emotional content is what we'll get engaged with. And so Instagram really changed about 3 years ago where it saw what TikTok was doing. TikTok doesn't care who you follow. They're a content forward platform. They present you with content that keeps you on the platform. So Instagram started to do that. So now you don't only get content from people you follow, you get videos that will keep you there. And so that actually changes the whole nature of the platform. It's not a social media platform anymore. It's a business media platform, which I think that at least depersonalizes it. When I was like leaving in July, there was like a lot of, man, I poured so much of myself into this thing and I feel so devalued by it. And I was talking to Stephen Porges, who's the creator of polyvagal theory, so like the nervous system. And he was saying like, whenever you're capable of being criticized, you're vulnerable. So the nervous system is actually hypervigilant when you have a social media profile, because you exist here now 24 hours a day. You go to sleep previously, before social media, you were safe socially. But all this stuff can be happening. So if you look at the data when you're on a date and your phone is face down on the table, you're less vulnerable because you're being pulled psychologically to this thing. There's a part of your awareness that is always actually operating on this, which that's interesting because I never thought of this, but the science on flow states where you're like,
Ikigai, right? I'm there. Yeah.
Yeah. So is that what happens when you're in a flow state, which for people, watching, that is the idea that you're doing something that you're so captivated by it. You love it so much. For some people, it's playing bridge. For others, it's surfing, right?
Dancing,
Music,
having
right.
sex, having a little mushrooms.
Right. So exactly. So you're at one with the music.
Yep.
And the prefrontal cortex actually shuts down when that happens. It's less active. And that's where the construction of the self is. So if you're always thinking about who you need to be and that you're at social risk, you're actually never present because you're always going through a filter. So you're actually like microseconds behind. And if you add like kind of the final nail in the coffin of how this works, is that not only are you always capable of you're always being judged by people, friends and not. So if you have a personal profile, this is true. But if you have a business, I'd say it's even amplified, especially if your business is based on you.
Right. When you have 500 real estate agents.
Oh yeah. Right. Because like you see like, oh, now it makes sense that I'm anxious.
Yeah.
It makes sense that I want to always know, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe?
Right.
And the last thing is that not only is that happening, but your value is being determined by a non-human entity, an algorithm. If you or I are in a relationship and I'm feeling taken advantage of, exploited, not safe, we could talk about it. And then ideally our relationship would shift and behaviors would shift, or we'd end the relationship. But with these platforms, they're not relational. There's no customer service and they don't care. So for me, a lot of the exploration has been like, how do you be in a relationship with something that's not meant to have a healthy relationship with you? Well, one I think now I'm learning is like depersonalize it. But you have to actually create layers of space from it. Because if you can't say no to something, like my business was so dependent on it.
Yeah, I went and looked. Yeah, like most people wouldn't let go of 1 million followers.
No, I remember I had this guy who's like, oh, so you're doing it for money, to make money on YouTube? I'm like, buddy, any
You're missing the whole
business
point.
strategist would know this is the dumbest idea.
Yeah, it's a strong move. Like it's a move of transformation over transactional. Like you didn't sell out on that one. You went the other way.
No, I had to like learn how to be without it.
Yeah.
And and how to diversify. And it was imperative that I diversified for my own nervous system. I needed to be like, I can't be reliant on this thing that abuses me and extracts from me.
As you're talking about it, I'm like, just a 24-hour frame you put on it, I feel like, oh my God, I'm being judged 24 hours.
Yeah.
And then you were like the couple of seconds delay of being present in the flow state and how it robs you of that. You know, we've been talking a lot about, especially with her coaching, this avatar, right? Like, or you're either in the game or you're playing the game, right? And all I can imagine is when you're in flow state, life is right here, like you're in it.
Yes.
Whereas if you're not, you could see your own self walking around.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Because it's instead of like right here, you're a couple seconds behind watching yourself go
Yeah,
around.
you're like orchestrating
Yes.
and planning, which is very much what hypervigilance is. You know, like if you grew up and needed to like walk on eggshells, you're actually always thinking about safety all the time.
Yep.
So you're trying to predict. And this is the same thing. It's like, I'm trying to predict what people will like. Stephen Pressfield's book, The War of Art,
Great book.
so good. And
Yes.
in it, he has this quote from, I forget the guy's name, but he calls it the hack. And he talks about how the hack is essentially like the artist who tries to figure out what their audience wants.
Yeah.
It's the politician who consults the polls before taking a position.
Yeah. So is Jackson Pollock throwing all the paint
Yeah.
for other people? Or is it so
Or
not
is
to
that
throw
his
Warhol?
Like Rick Rubin's talking about that a lot now.
Oh, yes. So you would think is Warhol, was he doing it more for because he commercialized it, right? I
Yeah.
don't know enough, but that's so interesting. And I think, I know I kind of set you off on a different tangent, but back to you're going to use this as a relationship type thing and how we're lacking this. It's impossible to be in a relationship with another human being at the level we want to be if we can't even be present with ourselves. And so you've kind of like unshackled yourself from this prison and did it at the highest stakes. It's easy for me. I mean, I got 3,000 followers. What am I really giving up? Like you had it all on that from outside looking in and going, this isn't serving me. And to be able to walk away is inspirational. It's great.
Thanks. You know, it's interesting because like I know so many people in this space that are struggling. You know, I did this talk at a conference for entrepreneurs. And I said, who here has social media for their business? Almost everybody. Who here doesn't like it or has a tension with it? Almost everybody. And I said, isn't that fascinating? Like we're all agreeing to participate in this thing that actually brings us stress and struggle, which doesn't mean you got to throw it away. But it means, because I think it's very much part of like, is it the cold calling of today? Like I didn't like having to go talk to people I didn't know and like present a product. But I'm also like, can we be informed about how it's impacting us? And can we build in layers so that it doesn't rob us of our joy and our well-being and presence, as you're saying?
Can you be in flow state ever in social media with those layers you're talking about?
I think so. Like I feel like I'm in the ideation part of it because I'm like, oh, people need this. Like I need to learn this so I can teach it. Because for me, you know, how you said like connection is never been more important, especially because you think of like all of the conversations about politics or an ideology is like we are lacking the skills to be able to sit with someone who votes differently than us because of all the things we think about who they must be because this entity appeals to them. And I always think to myself, like when I was younger, I grew up in like the Texas of Canada. And I was definitely more of like a liberal thinker.
Yeah.
But I made a lot of judgments about the more conservative thoughts. You know, like, why can't we just do this? Oh, like, you know, there was a lack of curiosity. But it just got greater as social media just amplifies what you like and what you hate and reinforces your belief systems. And it's easy to stay in this chamber of, like an echo chamber. But, you know, like, the crazy aunt or the crazy uncle or both who voted differently or had weird beliefs or they were hippies or they were not or whatever, they actually were so important to the family dynamic because they allowed you to be exposed to ideas and thoughts that you would normally have not been. But family and just like a diverse group of friends will do that. Mm-hmm. But we've gotten to a place where like, you don't believe what I believe, we can't even be friends. And I'm like, man, if COVID caused you to disown someone, if politics did, like get them back. Cause it's like how do you be in an exceptional relationship without having a difference of opinion, a difference of thought? And that's actually not a sign of a problem. That's actually a sign of individuality and two humans who have two different experiences of the world. And what makes a couple more powerful is actually by seeing each other as intelligent and those experiences as intelligent, and then actually walking forward with the information of two people. That's always better.
Well, you can't have an amazing relationship with they're having some level of truth to it. And if
Right.
you're going to have truth, you're going to collide a little bit.
You're
And
gonna
we've
have some
Right.
conflict,
Because it's
yeah.
subjective at times.
Right.
Of course, and I think one of the biggest blessing and curse of my life was growing up in New York, because everybody was real, right? The joke of
I do like that about New York.
right,
Right.
we're kind, we're not nice,
I like it
like we're
sometimes.
ball breakers,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? But I didn't have that feeling when I was young. I felt like, even with race, like everyone felt like you were all together, like we're
Yeah.
on top of each other, like everyone's like. I mean, a lot of fist fights, but then you become the best friend. I mean, I sound like I'm 100 years old right now talking
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that. But it was just different. Like even 30 years later in the West Coast, I'm still almost apologizing for my just commitment to talking in the truth. And the truth, we just had Halloween. I joke that the scariest mask or scariest thing you can give somebody or show somebody or outfit you can wear is an outfit of the truth.
I
People
agree.
just avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's such medicine, too.
but it's a lonely path, and a lot of people aren't willing to go there with you.
Right. Yeah.
And I think it forces you, like you were saying, to be curious, right? Rather than like, why do you believe that? Like that's, or me judging you and saying that's ridiculous versus why do you believe that? I'm curious, tell me, and go into it like, oh, I never really, and I considered that
Yeah,
before.
see where the actual conversation even can go.
Yes.
Instead of just dismiss it. So
Well, and
naturally.
not moralizing it, because that's also a failure. It's like, oh, if you vote this way, you're good, and if you vote that way, you're bad. It's such a simple binary.
Yes.
And it's a trap. It's a trap. I'm right, you're wrong, right? Like these are all traps, and they don't work relationally. It's my friend Africa Brooke wrote this very viral article that was called "Why I'm Leaving the Cult of Wokeness," and she's a black woman from the UK, and she said that we fight for everything but diversity of thought.
Yeah.
And I was like, is that so true? And I think in our own relationships, the skill set of being able to turn difference, like you being the same as me, is not attractive anyways, right? Like I forget who said it, but it's like, the first thing is I am not you, and after that, everything else will make sense. And I think about that a lot of like, it is actually the differentiation that I have with Kylie that makes us more powerful.
This path that you're on. So where are you going? So it seems like you're a seeker of truth. You're committed to connecting people. Like, are you on some mission or journey, or is there something that you and Kai are going towards, or are you just putting in the work? Like, what's the bigger?
That's a good question. My work has evolved a lot. I've always been really fascinated in, like for me, Create the Love was originally about relationship to other. And while that's still very much true, the reason I think romantic relationships are really potent as a way of learning is because they're the most frequent touch point of the things we're not good at and where we need healing. But they're not the only one. Our limitations, our beliefs, all those things can show up in illness. They could show up in our relationship to our body, our relationship to money, our relationship to our purpose. And so I love exploring all those subjects of like wherever the doorway is, take it, because for me, Create the Love is more about really coming into aligned relationship with yourself. And for me, what I know to be true so far, I'm open to it being different, is that when people are out of integrity with their values, that's when they suffer. And the majority of the time when we're young, we learn, from the ages of 0 to 8, we're learning, how do I be safe in my family, in my culture, in my community? Who do I need to be in order to be loved and to be safe? But sometimes that isn't who we truly are. I'd say often it isn't. Mm-hmm. And so I see in that time of our life, we sort of separate from our authentic self. And it's through relationship that we have the opportunity to bring that part back, to
Heal it.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there's an idea that when you experience trauma, and that could be any form, you actually split. And so much of when you discover you have a health issue, you start to eat better. And then you experience what true nourishment feels like. Mm-hmm. And then if you experience nourishment in your body, you can't then be in a toxic relationship. Because the contrast, you start to get into fitness. the experience of your body. Your cells are alive, and someone says something to you and you can feel your cells shrink. When you're exceptional at work, but then you recognize that you're not exceptional in love. You're like, once you come alive in one area, you can't help but come alive in all.
Like a domino effect.
But you can say no to that. But what will happen is it will, in my opinion, create inflammation, because you're now knowingly experiencing the dissonance of your potential not being realized.
As you're talking and I'm holding space and listening and receiving, I'm just holding on to that comment. When
Which
you're
one?
out of integrity with your values, you suffer.
Yeah,
That's what you said.
that's
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Super powerful. And then you went to explain it, like, and then it manifests out.
Yeah.
Which makes sense, because it means like when you're not in flow state, you're out of alignment, right? I think it's a beautiful way of looking at it.
Yeah, when you're not living your truth, right?
Yes.
And it actually is funny how it circles back to your closing ceremony and how you let that part of you guys die, because there's a part of you that I'm sure had to really look at the truth, the inner truth and the truth of your relationship, and really get like very clear on that before you could allow those doors to open, before you could walk through into a different relationship. Like that had to happen for you guys to really acknowledge, like, hey, this is how we're true to ourselves. This is how we're true to our relationship. We honor it. But now that's the only way. It's just like pain, right? They talk about pain. The best way is to just go right through and to get to the other side. And I think that it's beautiful how you can really take all of those concepts and have it go full circle that way.
Do you know how enjoyable this is for me? You know how hard it is for like a man to connect to another man like this, and it to be considered masculine at the same time.
Yeah.
Like to be able to
Yeah.
go there.
You know, I was telling you guys before we hit record that I was speaking at an all-women's conference.
Yeah.
And like, my humor is somewhat offside, sometimes quite. And and I don't filter,
Yeah.
you know?
Why would you? That's not flow state.
Yeah, and I think it's just such a powerful thing to be on a stage and not like, again, the flow, right? It's like I'm not thinking about how I need to perceive. Now, mind you, I've practiced, I've done it a lot, so there's the reps that are there that are the skill set. How to put thoughts and feelings into words, how to see myself on a stage and be in the experience and not, you know, and recognize when I experience anxiety on a stage, how do I manage it? But was the common thing that I heard, because I cried, I laughed, I did a lot of things. And the most common thing I heard from most of the people who came up to me was, it's so refreshing to see a man comfortable, emotional, and funny, and that, like, that's actually what we want. And I don't say that to say I'm in any way, because if Kai was here, she'd probably be like, he's not all he's cracked up to be some of the time. Because it's never about, like, I always present the imperfections, because that's
Right.
how we
Yeah.
connect. And that's why my work has always been like, here's what I did, and here's how I fucked up, and here's what I learned.
And that's how people can connect and relate to you. Yeah.
Right, because it's like, I'm not a guy on a pedestal. It's like, yo, me and you, I get defensive. When we had a kid, I was like, I thought I was good at communication. And I was like, I guess I got a whole other level to unlock.
New level, new devil.
Yeah, new levels, new devils. But I say it because I think for a lot of men, as you're saying, they don't know that emotionality is not correlated to masculinity. And no, I echo it back that it's such a privilege and an honor to have this conversation and to do it with a man who's like meets you there.
Yeah. And I feel like I could talk to you for days, and that feels great. Like you I didn't realize what your path was when I met you. And seeing what you've done on your own, what your wife has done, how you've brought it together is an inspiration for us, because this world needs more of it. And for me, when you talk about flow state, I if I ever get a tattoo, which I don't have one, I'm going to get one of this Venn diagram. It's called Ikigai. It's a Japanese thing. And it's 4 circles, not 3. And it almost looks like 2 circles and 2 circles.
Yeah, I know that one.
And the original one is what you're passionate about, what you're good at, and the byproduct of what you can get compensated with. Well, the Japanese added a 4th one, what impact you could have on the world. Which to me is like the perfect way to put on top. And then it all intersects in that one spot, and that's the flow state. And I believe that you're having impact. And that's why I asked you that question. Whether it's a mission or not, whether you're out seeking it or trying to change the world, you are. Because I think the things that we are in the most lack of are the simplest ones. Bringing it back, stripping it away, revealing it, and connecting like we are now. And that's why we're doing what we're doing. Right. And so I can't tell you how appreciative I am that you spent this time with us, went out of your way, and things like that.
Yeah, we're super grateful, especially on the last minute notice and just taking it full circle, like, you know, how we met and with even Kai, and there was that connection. But, you know, we have these moments of like, we don't even realize the depth of people unless you're willing to sit there and have these conversations, you know?
No, I appreciate that. And, you know, you're right. It's like, when you start being you, that's how people find you. You know, it's like the power of speaking out. The reason it's so powerful, although at first you're alone, is one other person sees you and it lowers the social risk. And so when we first say, okay, I'm committed to truth and whatever that means, and sometimes we'll break that agreement, and that just means we have more space to learn where we lose ourselves. So it's not evidence of a problem, but actually evidence of possibility. And that's a different way of orienting to ourselves. I'm not trying to fix something that's broken. I'm actually expanding what's possible. And that, when we commit to truth, then now other people start to be revealed to that. And then other people go, oh, I like truth too. I can only find you if you're in truth. So it can be lonely at first because it separates you from where everyone's agreeing to lie. You know, family systems that agree to not talk about hard things, that all of a sudden you might feel like the black sheep in the family, but you actually start to be the liberator, you know, and then the other people are like, thanks so much for saying something. I really appreciate it. I really identify with what you said. So I love what you guys are up to. I think it's beautiful. It's needed in the relationship space. It's a premise that I think is really, it's cool. I think even I'm like, man, tenure, I'm guessing this will turn into like a weekly check-in that people do.
Absolutely.
You know, let's break up every week and get married every week. Sunday dinner is vows.
That's
well,
so
definitely funny. It requires check-ins, like constant check-ins, you know, and just making sure you're on the right path.
How many people don't check in for 50 years, you know?
Yep.
Or even with themselves, with their partners.
Oh my
and
God.
It's just
I think they're afraid of what they're going to find.
Yes. I'm like,
it gets a lot harder after 10 years because the pile under the check-in is, you know,
right?
Like, oh, you want to check in?
Yeah.
Let's check in.
all I know is I'm definitely burning this house down with me and you in it. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And
that's beautiful.
That'll be great. Not that you need it, but what's the best way for people to connect to you?
No, I do need it. I love it. Thank you for asking that question.
Okay.
Mark Groves Podcast, maybe to be renamed, maybe not. You can find all my courses are all in my community. So it's markgroves.com/aligned. And that's where, like, if you sign up, it's all my courses. There's a community of like-minded people. Like, it's so cool. I created it when I left Instagram. And it was so cool to have a space where everyone's like just all in on becoming the best version of themselves, and just how they rally for one another, like seeing people leave toxic relationships, stand up, set boundaries, and start dating again, heal breakups. So that relationship work is going to continue. I think I'm going to move into the TV space, but I'm not really sure what that looks like yet.
That'd be fun.
That'd be so fun.
Yeah.
For me, that's like, I have some TV ideas that I'm like, let's go. So yeah, you can find me markgroves.com or createthelove.com, but everything will lead people wherever they need to find me.
Amazing.
Well, I have a feeling this is going to be a popular one. Thanks for tuning in to the 10-Year Marriage Podcast. Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes.